Hello. Raj and Roshali, hello. You're muted, Raj.
Certainly.
There you go. Yeah. Hello, Roshali.
Hello.
Hello. Welcome. So I guess I should ask, do you have updates for us? I mean, I know it's still the community period, but nothing.
This I have a bit. I will be sharing my screen.
Okay.
One more, please.
Here we go.
Can you see it?
Yeah.
That's it. Okay. I actually have to write down what things I have done on daily life, so it will be clear for me what I did. So I wrote a blog. Next thing I did was YouTube channel and set up Dharma platform. To simulation. They have very pretty good content here, plus document, and presentation. With the tutorial about now, I will check this video and it's pretty good. I understood that is not that hard. Next thing I'm having reviewing and defining a proposal for GSoC and presentation. So I can place it in database, my thoughts for giving presentation. And next thing I did is again the top creating list for Blender after starting with making the list what I will be making, and certainly documentation for the ABM model for project network and Dharma. And next thing I also came across the limited ABM thing. It's like there is a repository of UVM, and they have created questions there. We can do many things like alien simulations with GSoC language, so it will be helpful for us. I'm thinking about doing this instead of this, but we have many options to do alien things. Now, I watched all human results of human being station when it correction part that I will laughing about. That's somewhat famous. And next, I'm testing ABM library. I checked that again. And next, I did watch the organization video from presented language. It was next, the two principles to get to matter to mind our discuss server. I checked the content there, what you have posted, shared, whatever. And many things I don't know in this page that I will be doing that I want to learn this much about the lots of new things I can across. Learning about the people. I also go to this Google Drive PDF we have mentioned in earlier session that how to be successful open source software, how to do that. This I have completed my 5 to 10 pages, but I will be doing again, like read again. I left in middle, so I will do it. And then continually learning about successful and completely placements, attendance, research, computer science, yeah. I also attended research computer science, how to be successful computer details, but it's okay to, sorry, what am I saying? 15 minutes, 18 minutes, start exploring university with computer and this is the live webinar kind of thing. I attended, but I don't understand it clearly what you are saying, but yeah, I will have to have a look. I also check our open house playlist. I find many things interesting there. Like, and today I checked it to discussing computer things which is in the service sector. It's really fascinating how future is gonna be, and we also have some amazing products upcoming. Plus, I checked Blender, how to make 360 video tutorial to make a project and water boundary simulation mode. This is also an interesting this video. The boundary for our very fluid water to experiment. This will be helpful, and this is also doing the test. I like it. Like how land star will incorporate each other. That's it. And for next month, next week plan, explaining my project plan with PPT, review presentation, and start working on project template 1. That's it. That's all.
Well, that looks very detailed. Thank you for that update. Yeah. So the project template 1 is, have you, I guess that's in your proposal. I can't remember. So is that just something you're going to make up, or is that something you've already got ready to, I mean, how are you going to approach that?
I think about making Blender assets, brain, like all after I will be making that in week like this one will be the after 29 months, so I thought that I will be making early, like this diamond period, but I have time so much. So I'm thinking about making brain and one other Blender assets this week or next. So that's it.
Okay. Well, thank you. Yeah, let's. Yeah. So next week, yeah, you'll give your presentation, I guess, and hopefully, yeah. If you have any questions about that, put it in the channel, in the Slack channel, and we can talk about it. Because I don't really want you to put a lot of time into it, but I want you to basically recap your your proposal, and then I want you to be somewhat effective in the presentation style. So all the typical tips that people give about giving a presentation. So yeah, I look forward to that. Thank you. So Raj, did you have an update?
Yeah, actually, this week I mainly tried to look into the integration of Django and Mesa because the problem with Mesa is that I'll just share my screen.
Yeah.
Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Yeah, so this is just a sample Mesa model. So in this model, all works fine until you do the simulations, you plot the graph and all that. But the moment you want to launch this on a web server and view it on a web interface, it opens up this, which is pretty good. You have all the adjustments, the start, stop, step, all those things. But the issue is this renders a dedicated, what can I say, a web page for this. That our whole website is not just about the model. It is like few other things, and model is at one part of the website. So I was looking into ways how I can this model, instead of opening up in a completely separate dedicated page, how can we make it just a small part of our website? Yeah. So I joined the community of Mesa, and I had a talk with the admin of the project, and he gave these few ways that can be done. So one he's saying is have a website separately and host the model separately, and then maybe we can add buttons that if you press button 1, then it will take you to the deployed model 1 like this. If you press button 2, another model. But that is, I think, not the best way to go about it. Or another thing which he was suggesting is if in the same domain, as in if we have a site called abc.com, for example. So the first model can be at abc.com/model1. The second one can be at abc.com/model2. Or the third one is everything in the same domain. But this will basically be like modifying the Mesa pipeline or something, because the command is, there is something called server.launch in Mesa, a command, and it launches on the port value we give. So another suggestion he gave was somehow get into the pipeline of this launch function, and instead of it making it as a completely different website, just somehow make it to give you the output in a particular way you want and integrate it in your website, which is, I think, a bit time consuming and a difficult process. So I looked into the repository and all that. So I was just trying that before the coding period officially starts, I can get all these things planned on how I was to proceed and all that, so that I don't spend much time on thinking, rather than most of the time should be spent on coding and implementing. Apart from that, I have drafted my blogs for this week. I'll publish them tonight, and I'll also share them in the Slack channel. And I also do have one more update, but I'll probably save it for tomorrow's meeting, because I just need a little bit more clarity before I can present it as an update. So yeah, that's it.
That's great. That sounds great. So yeah, this is exactly the type of thing you need to do in the community period, is to clear up a lot of these things if there's an issue of implementation. So it's good. Yeah, we'll think about that. If you come up with a good solution, we can decide when we get to a point where it's like a clear decision. We have to make a decision. Then we'll talk about it. But I mean, I'll trust you to get to the point where we can have something that seems clean to implement, and then we'll say if there's something where there are maybe two possible solutions where they're about the same level of feasibility, then we can talk about which one we want to go with. But it looks pretty good, and yeah, it looks like you've got everything set up there. Yeah, I'm looking forward to your blog post. I guess for Shali, if you want to post another post this week, that'd be great. Although I don't, during the community period, you don't necessarily have to do that, but definitely during the coding period. So, well, it looks like you're doing well. And so, Jesse is kind of busy today, or he's split between two meetings, so I don't want to call on him. But the first thing
I'm actually here.
Oh, okay.
But I am limited today, but I was able to listen mostly to everything so far.
Okay.
So I don't know what you wanted to do for your time. I know you mentioned some things for the map and stuff, but I might not be able to do a full. I guess I was curious what you wanted me to speak on that way.
Oh, well, I was gonna. Yeah, I can go over the map. I have a copy of it here. Did you just want to give an update? Do you have anything you want to report, or?
Nothing extremely. So I'm doing some stuff with Nick Vick that happened from today. It was kind of urgent, and I think I'll actually be done with that shortly. So I'm able to say more in like, I don't know, 10 minutes or so.
All right.
But not a whole lot. Just a lot of macro admin work across like the lab and some things for this too. I have some things in development for GSoC stuff, but it's not exactly ready yet. So more ahead in that front, but nothing too major. Glad to see everybody and making progress, and that's good. But that's about it for me.
All right, yeah, that's great. Thank you. So yeah, I look forward to the GSoC related things. Last week we talked about. I kind of went over an overview of the lab and what we do, and some of the things that some of the tools we use, like we've been in the Slack for a while. We've done some of the Discord channels. We've done the website, and those materials I handed out where we have the books that kind of tell you how to do open source software, and then some of the more targeted readings on all of that. So, the open source landscape is actually quite rich. There's a lot in those books that you don't have to sit there and read them back to back and memorize them cover to cover. But, those will be useful things to go back to for your own reference. So, if you want to know how to do licensing, or you want to know how to do, sort of how to develop things. There are different development styles that people use. People use things like Agile and other types of techniques, but there are other ways to do it as well. One of the things we'll be stressing in the coding period is not only doing like development and doing that efficiently, but also documentation. And so I don't know how much they cover on documentation on those books, but documentation is basically two parts. The first part is when you're working on something, you take notes. So Raj is working with Colab notebook or Jupyter notebook, I can't remember which, but that's an excellent environment for, you document each piece of code. You have modules, and you can run the kernels, independently, but you also have things that you can put notes in right there. So it's all in one place. The other part of documentation is making it so that other people can use what you've done. So that may be a little bit more detailed or a little bit cleaner. So you might go over it a bit more. And then we'll probably have a way to sort of make that available after the end of the project for people to come maybe back to next year or some other time, where they don't know what's going on in the project. Or you even forget a lot of things 6 months down the line, and you need to go back and look at those things. So, so documentation is going to be important, as well as coding in the coding period. But I just wanted to make you aware of that. So, so that's great. And I think, you'll get a lot out of some of this stuff. I'll be presenting during the summer, during the meetings. I'll present a little bit on something every week, so we'll have like a common frame of reference, and we can talk about those things. Usually about some of the development things, like how to make documentation or how to do licensing or whatever. I'm going to share my screen now, and okay, and then I wanted to go over this figure. So this is something that Jesse has created for the lab. So, I showed you the website last week, and that's, it gives you links to things. So you can go to different places. We have, profiles for GSoC. We have materials within the lab. We have, affiliations, publications, links to other projects. But this is a map of like all the things that we do in the lab. and it's always in flux. So, I mean, this is like the latest version, but it can always be updated. But it's an attempt to sort of cast a net around some of the things we're doing. So, there's the research banners at the top. So we have a couple of research banners. The first one is representational brains and phenotypes. And that research banner, so that has its own website, and you'll see it off of the links of the different projects. And that project is really based around like agent-based simulations or agent-based learning. So, for example, we've done a lot of the work that we've done with Breitenberg vehicles is in that project. We've done a lot of work with contextual geometric structures. That's also in that project. We've done things with cultural evolution. That's in that project. And so it's basically, all things agent, not necessarily the agent-based models working with that Raj is working with, but it basically for, artificial life, learning, those sorts of things. So that's that project, and that's that research banner, and it has a lot of different things going on in it. So if you go to that website, you'll see, different areas of interest and different publications that we've put out, and so that'll give you more information about what's going on there. But it's basically the idea that we have these embodied sort of artificial brains in agents that are sort of representations of, biology and intelligence and that sort of thing. And then there's DivaWorm, which is another research banner, and I've talked about that. That's almost sort of quasi-independent from the lab structure itself. It's affiliated with the OpenWorm Foundation a little bit more. But the difference between DivaWorm, say, and representational brains and phenotypes is that DivaWorm is more biologically oriented. So there's some biological inspired stuff in representational brains and phenotypes, but DivaWorm is more dealing with like evolution and model organisms and things like that. There's still this computational focus. So that's that research banner. Then this is the research banner that you're technically in, the Education and Open Source research banner. And this is a research banner where we are interested in some of our educational initiatives, some of our mentorship initiatives, and then we're interested in promoting open source software, and even things like open access, publishing, and open, sort of working open. There's this whole host of things that are under this topic, open. So, we've done a lot of open source development in the past. We've done our GSoC projects, which are open source. We use a lot of open source tools. We also advocate for open access publishing. And we've done some work with like the eLife community and the ASAP Bio community, where there's been a lot of focus on this open aspect. Then there's education, which is, of course, our mentorship programs. So we not only do this GSoC mentorship, but we do a mentorship program with the University at Albany. There are other opportunities that we're always seeking out on, how to bring people into research, how to get them to do research and feel comfortable doing that. And so that's kind of what we do with GSoC, except GSoC is more in the software development side of things. But that's the sort of the research banner, education and open source. Then there's Cognition Futures, which is headed up by Jesse. And we do a lot of things with like cognitive science and rethinking cognitive science and how those, topics can be cast in a new way. The term futures simply is based on this idea of what is cognitive science going to look like in the future, or what could it look like. So there's this idea of like trajectories from, some starting point on to, what if we had cognitive science with more biology in it? Or what if we had cognitive science with more philosophy in it? What would that look like? And so that theme has been actually quite successful. We've had a number of reading groups and study groups based on some of those things, and it sort of incorporates things like cybernetics as well. So, and then there's the Society, Ethics, and Technology research banner, which is a lot of the stuff that we do with NYCWC, which is the New York Celebration of Women in Computing. We also do things with different topics in technology, and like the study, philosophy of technology, history of technology, those sorts of things. And the social aspect, social ramifications of these things. So it's always, it's always good for some discussions. We've also done some, some talks. We've yet to really publish a paper on it, but that's fine. I think it's a pretty robust theme. It's also something that Jesse is involved heavily with. So I try to help people develop their own research banners. If people are interested, they can develop their own research banners. They can host them in the lab, and they can develop them as they want. I usually have some supervision over it, but I try to give them some space. You can also develop your own themes, topics, and implementations, and that's just like how would I cast these different research banners? So like in education, open source, that's pretty broad. How would I cast that into something that would fit my vision of that area? And so to that end, we've done a lot of different implementations, explored a lot of topics. And these are just, projects that I maybe call them projects plus, where you have a project and you're trying to develop, this idea that you have into what we call academic artifacts, which are, presentations, papers, and even software, as needed. So one thing we've done is the MetaBrains. That goes into representational brains and phenotypes. And the MetaBrains approach is where we have these agents that have layered representations. And the layered representations are, going from like something that has very limited representational capacity, like a neural network, and building up to something with very rich representational capacity, such as a symbolic processor, and then linking those together so you have a system that can do both, sort of statistical learning and semantic learning. And so, we've written a couple papers on that. It just, when we get the opportunity to put things out on it, we do. But, it's not something, it's something that we have sort of an informal roadmap for, but it's not something we focus on all the time. And just there in that bin, and it's ready to go, and we want to talk about it. Then there are agent-based models. So we've done a number of different approaches to agent-based models. That kind of fits into a number of these research banners. So, you could have a theme or a topic that you work on, and you could contribute to a number of these research banners. So agent-based models, those kind of fit into representational brains and phenotypes, like the developmental Bradenburg vehicles work. Or it can also fit into education and open source, like the things we're doing with the open source sustainability simulations. So, you can fit them into multiple categories. Then there are things like, brain organoids, which is a thing that Morgan's working on, where we take a thing that we're interested in, we try to fit into that area somehow. So, this is something we've been working on. Morgan's been reviewing the literature, trying to find a niche for it. We haven't really done any sort of publications or presentations on it, but it's this working theme where we just kind of revisit the topic and try to find a place to plug in, to the world. And that kind of fits into DevoWorm, but, we have to find a place where we have to find a way to sort of a niche in that field. We don't want to overextend ourselves and say, well, we're going to do this great thing and we're going to compete with Facebook and Google on something. That's not going to happen. You have to be like, you have to find your niche depending on what your resources are. So, do things with open source and open science, as I said, cybernetics, cogsci, and information theory that plugs into cognition futures. And it's the same here. What can we say about these things that kind of fits where we are in the world? Our resources, our perspectives. Sometimes when you have, a collection of perspectives, as we do in this group, which is highly interdisciplinary, you can approach problems in a new way. So you can give, some, you can give some perspective that no one else can. So, then we have digital humanities, AI, ethics, and safety, all these things that kind of come out of these different research banners. Then there are these things in purple, which are sort of the research banners restated. Developmental brain vehicles. Actually, okay, I see what this is. So these are sort of the implementations. Developmental brain vehicles are sort of an instance of this representational brains and phenotypes. This is where we're actually developing these sort of robotic agents in silico on a computer. We did a GSoC project on that in 2019. We've been working on it since. The code is there, it's open source, so people can work on it. And we haven't really made a lot of strides since then, but, it's there and it's available. And, it's one of these things where you can then work on it as its own thing. So we have an open source platform or a set of open source approaches to this. We have, it available for people. They can cross-fertilize their efforts across the research banners or across these themes and topics, and then, realize that and then implementation. The same thing holds true for DevoLearn, which I mentioned last week. DevoLearn is the sort of deep learning approach to developmental biology, analyzing microscopy images and other types of data. And again, this is something that goes year after year. So we're revisiting DevoLearn all the time. This year, we have 2 interns working on, in GSoC, working on graph neural networks and the segmentation aspects of DevoLearn. So, that always provides new opportunities. There's mentoring and professional development. There's the internship program. And then there's this thing Jesse works on called Frontier Maps, which fits into Cognition Futures because it shows kind of the potential frontiers of cognitive science, or it's an attempt to sort of map those out. So again, that's something we can bring people into. There are always new opportunities, year after year. So, one of the things in your projects, and you don't need to keep a strong, you don't need to keep an eye on this necessarily from the beginning, but thinking kind of in the back of your head about, how does this effort that I'm doing this summer, how does that sustain itself over the next few years? So when you're making something, you want to focus on the documentation, focus on some of the aspects of usability, focus on maybe, using something that's not going to be obsolete in a year, and bring that together, and then, we can package that and, make sure that there's some sustainability to it. Because I think a lot of projects die because, people don't think about that. They just kind of do a project, and then there it is. It's left to sort of sit there, and no one reads it or uses it or anything. They don't think about it anymore. And then that's a bunch of wasted effort. We kind of want to try to avoid that. We do have, cases where that's unavoidable. It's just that, okay, the project was good, but maybe there's not a use for it, but like I said, that's something that when you're in the professional world, you're going to be thinking about long term. How do I make my project relevant? How do I make my work relevant down the line? And, it might be a matter of, in tech, having obsolete things is always unavoidable. There are all sorts of obsolete things. You always run into technical debt, and, it's just a thing that happens, but you want to try to minimize that as much as possible. So our efforts, kind of go into conferences, they go into papers, they go into other things. So this is just a list of the different conferences we've done. We've done this discussion group, Trajectories in Cognitive Science. So sometimes we host, different discussion groups or workshops. Sometimes we contribute to larger conferences, and there are always opportunities. So I would encourage you, if you're interested, if an opportunity comes along, that we, work on a submission. I think at the end of this summer will be especially a time where we can sit down and reevaluate what's been done and say, okay, now we're going to try to target some venue to present this at. So in other words, it keeps your project relevant beyond the sort of the end of the project. And then we have these organizations that we're affiliated with, Google Summer of Code, of course, OpenWorm, INCF, which of course you know about, UAlbany, which is a university, Neuromatch, which is this academy slash conference that we talk about a lot, Plot Twisters, which is something Jesse's involved with heavily, and others. So we have these partners that are external to this lab that we can leverage their resources and be involved in different things, partner with them. There are other organizations here not listed, such as the Active Inference Institute and NeurotechX, and those are just all organizations that allow us to sort of, they give us resources like, open educational resources or, opportunities for collaboration or sponsorship. And so that helps do a lot of this. So yeah, that's all I had on that. Any questions?
There's a few things I'd like to add to it, but I don't like to hear if there's any questions or feedback or things first.
Okay. Did you have something that was you wanted to say?
Excuse me. Yeah, I think for people who aren't, I know some of you all have been on YouTube and kind of, I think you come to like some meetings and you kind of know this about the lab, but I just want to emphasize it because there's some things that make orthogonal our lab really different and set apart and useful in different ways. And I think, it would be, super and great if the people who joined during Google Summer of Code stay with the lab and build out things here. But, oftentimes it's not, it's, there's different seasons and things change and people move on and do stuff. Like most of the people that I've joined with my original Google cohort, or Google Summer of Code cohort, are master students or grad students now, and they're not active. So I think about this stuff in the context of what's really cool about the lab if you stay with us in the future, which isn't a mandatory thing, obviously, but also what are the things that in your time here will you maybe take away or realize or start to get a sense of now that you may not have full context for, but when you're thinking about us in the future or this time here, things that may stand out or like that you may want to consider or put into your own practice. And I think I'm remembering last time I think we talked a bit about like learning experiences or learning outcomes that we'd like to have in the lab, and I think that's one of the things that I'm going to make a note of. That if I have a little bit more time, I'm actually going to use a physical whiteboard this time. Myself here. I think that's what will be sort of formalized a bit more, but just to kind of speak upon that now in my current ability to do so, I think it's important to think about it, like I said, in terms of like long-term takeaways versus immediate things that are available. in this summer, you won't have what you're doing is pretty, I would say, very well structured, and in a software development team, that's probably the level of structure you're going to get with, and there's a lot of variation in that, because if you're in a startup situation, the structure is probably going to be what you make of it versus your supervisor or the person found in the company, with some exceptions, because there's a lot of different organizational variation in those ways, from startup to like academic research that's funded or mandated by a grant versus a corporate directive. But in Google Summer of Code right now, it's pretty, the boundaries are pretty set, and it's an environment where you're encouraged to take a lot of risks, and your risks will generally be rewarded in the sense that so long as you're being reasonable and communicating your expectations, it's going to be great. It's going to be fine as long as you do that. But to speak about the lab and sort of what the lab is doing, like why are we doing this from an administrative standpoint? A lot of what we do in the lab is to, I guess I'll contextualize it a bit with my story, in that I'm still pleasantly surprised and like, let's hold on here. I'm still pleasantly surprised at how much because it's always funny to go from this process of wanting to do some stuff, and then where's the space for you to do it, and then if you focus on doing stuff and making that space, since you build that space over time, you can eventually have, like, quote unquote, a research group or a reading group that's specifically focused about what you want to do. And I think this lab has been really great in that, and I really appreciate kind of Bobby's attitude and approach to that. And I think he explicitly said it this time, and I wanted to point that out. You can make your own research banner. And when I came to the lab in 2019 during my original Google Summer Code cohort, if you asked me to do that, I'd be like, well, that's nice, but I don't like what I really want to do. Like, there's so much I want to do, and I don't know why would I even do that right now? But I think over time it became, oh yeah, I want to have something I can point to house a lot of the discussions I want to have, or the research I want to do, or the conversations that matter to me. And I think what we're modeling in the lab is, one, there's a way to do that that's sort of semi-academic, para-academic, that's involved institutions and has partners, but also is free from some of the constraints about funding or certain obligations that require X, Y, Z in other settings. And I think that's something to think about over time. If you have questions about that, like after your time in the cohort or over the summer or any time, I think that'd be a really great thing to come back to us and talk about, because there's a lot of deep things that have gone into how and why that's the case. And are you going to be quizzed on those for your Google Summer of Code stuff? No, absolutely not. But there's reasons for why things are done here that kind of become clearer over time. I think it's a really cool thing to do. So, to go back to my story a little bit about this, is that when you having the ability to develop the stuff that you want to do and make concentrated efforts and have some benevolent advising, like from Bradley or other people in spaces like this, can really help you develop project or research leadership experience, and then also really advance key questions that you want to advance. And a lot of times, I've said many times over the past couple of years, like, wow, I feel lucky because some of the stuff I'm doing, even if it's at a lower level than like Google or DeepMind or what OpenAI is doing, or even if it's at a lower level, it's like there's some of the stuff you don't get to do until you're like 20 or 30 years in a field of study in like a specific academic setting. And I think software development's a little bit more Wild West than that in some ways, but still, being able to have the ownership and the project development outside of, you'll find this to be very common for people who maybe go to very privileged schools, and then they can sort of burn through a couple startups because they don't have any immediate financial pressure to sustain themselves. Like, oh well, we can do after school. I got a project. I got a startup idea. I want to make a big company. And that's not a bad thing. It's just not everybody has that means to do that. So creating spaces like this, or more broadly, intentionally cultivating research or academic spaces that are open to mentoring and open to sort of open science or open source, and having a space in that can matter very much. I just saw it pushing there. So that was basically the end of my sort of sermon about this. But if there's a question.
Yeah, Rochelle had a question about, she had a comment about, is it possible, can you explain a little about the VR project and like what project needs are? I understood it myself, but it'd be great to know your vision of it before giving my presentation. So, yeah, so that's actually the next thing I was going to talk about. I don't have a roadmap today, but I can go over the Discord. And this is the Discord where Rochelle mentioned in her updates. So why don't we do that next? So I'm going to share my screen. Let me get this up and running. Open Discord. All right. Let me share my screen again. Come up. All right. So this is the principles of bits to matter to mind, and the idea behind this is to serve as a clearinghouse for our community to talk about VR. I've been in VR a while. I've been in I went into my first cave environment in 2001, and I started working on this is pre sort of consumer VR. I worked in a headset, in 2002, 2003, and I've been working on it. I worked on it pretty intensely in the 2000s. In the 2010s, I stepped away for a bit, so I'm sort of recently re-immersing myself into a lot of the consumer VR. So, the roadmap here, I guess, is to sort of, we're at the stage where we don't really have an organizational vision. We would like to do things, VR for research, create assets, things like experimental environments, other types of environments for education and learning. And then if you go to our YouTube channel, you'll see that we have, I've done some videos where I'm in VR and I'm kind of in these different meeting rooms or giving presentations. And and I have a video on there about some of the tools we might use. So I'm in the Meta Quest 2, and I'm talking about the different web browsers, the different meeting software, and things like that. So those are things that we would like to leverage. So that's kind of our organizational vision. So we'd like to use it for these different things: research, collaboration, meeting space, and education. And so, one of the things I've been trying to do to get us thinking even beyond that, because it's kind of hard to know what we need when it's the technology is moving so fast. And there's so many opportunities maybe in the future. There is this cost of hardware, which, since we're a distributed lab, we don't have a centralized set of hardware for people just drop in and use. So we might be using things that are very inexpensive for people to get access to. So that's why, it's hard to really build a roadmap. But this is the the Discord here, I've tried to put this together so we have some resources, and then from there we can maybe draw a little bit more detailed roadmap as we go along. So, we have events. This is just general open source stuff like different hackathons and media streams. I haven't really put much in here. But we have topics, and so there's a virtual reality topic, there's a network science topic, which is kind of semi-related to VR, but I want to bring in things that we also do in the lab that are sort of cognates, so we can pull in like things into this, because VR is a technology, AR is a technology, augmented reality. You can use the technology and you can just like play with it, but you want to apply it to different things, especially when you're talking about research, because we have research interests we'd like to integrate them with. So we have network science, something called closed loop feedback, which is a sort of a topic in VR, which is important when you're moving around in VR and you have tracking systems that come with the technology, but there are things that you do in the world that require this closed loop feedback. So anything involving sensation and perception is closed loop feedback. You're pushing a button, or you're walking, or you're moving your hand, and you're moving an object, and when it moves you respond to it, and there's this closed loop feedback aspect. You can decouple the things that you do in the real world. So for example, if I move an object in the real world, there's a gravity associated with it, a set of forces that don't necessarily get replicated in VR. And I think we talked about this in the Saturday meeting. We talked about the interface design for the button that swings on a hinge, because you don't get that feedback. So there are a bunch of things related to that. We have a channel for closed loop feedback, something called Gibsonian information, which is an approach that we've been working on. We'll have more to say about that as we go through the summer, I think. Human augmentation, which is where you're augmenting yourself, your cognition, your body with different types of technologies. They're virtual technologies, but there are also other types of things. There are all sorts of topics. What I've done in this Discord is like put a bunch of topical links. And one of the reasons I've done it this way is because I want to have a clearinghouse for some of these issues. Like, for example, there are these issues, and when you see Meta advertise that now they have legs, and you think that's kind of silly. It kind of is, but also it's an outstanding question in VR. So why don't the avatars have legs? The answer is because if you render legs in a way that's not synchronized with your own legs and you're walking around, you can get motion sickness. And so this is true of a lot of different aspects of VR. You can suffer from motion sickness and vertigo and things like that if you don't have the right, if it's not simulated correctly, if you're in a headset where you can't see anything but that virtual world because you have other senses that are not aligned with your vision. So this has to be done proper in the right way. And so to understand this issue is to understand a lot of how to create some of these stimuli or some of these environments. Well, we'll call them stimuli because, one of the things we're interested in is, the sensory aspect of it. Like if I show you a cup, that's a stimulus. It's not a real cup. So, that has like its own properties and we have to understand how you interact with that. So even things like very simple things are not as simple as you might think. And so, there's also like neurobotics towards XR. This is like things where you're integrating like neural implants or brain imaging into virtual worlds or other types of interfaces. Towards XR is where you have this idea of extended reality, which incorporates augmented reality, virtual reality, and the like. So it's the term XR is kind of a catch-all term that they've come up with recently, but it encapsulates all of this And I think we should maybe talk about some of these terms because, when we're creating things, what do we call it? What do we want to, what kind of features do we want? So those are things that I want to have some, putting things in this channel, we might be able to have a conversation about them in a more focused way than just saying, okay, XR, what is it? Or having a specific vision and it turns out that it's wrong or it's not useful. Then we have working, which I've been doing some videos on, and there are other videos on YouTube about this where, we have this interest in building workspaces where we can meet and share ideas, give presentations. I was giving a stock presentation we have in the lab in a theater room, so I was able to use the theater as a prop actually in that video. But, we'd like to do more of that in the future where we can do things in VR and say, maybe use some of these things to our advantage in the presentation or, have meetings where we can talk about things, virtual objects or things like that. There's some stock rooms I know that Mozilla's been working on a Mozilla Spaces and things like that. So we can build up upon the things that already exist out there. Then there's haptics, which is the sense of touch. That's something we'll be talking more about that's important. Now with legs is kind of this idea about just breaking out the topic of legs and movement in VR. And then multi-sensory is where you're integrating different senses, into one. So, I want to keep this as a set of topics, almost like a library for our efforts. Then we have a methods section, which is where, there are different methods, different things of interest, documentation. Actually, there was one, I don't know where it is. I'm sorry. I think maybe methods is compacted here. That was community tools I talked about. So community tools are open papers, documentation, this thing, information society, which is social aspects of the technology. Then there's methods, which is data sets, shared interfaces, open source knowledge, virtual reality experiments. So these are things, integrating AI with VR. So these are things where, we have things like AI experiments where you're doing things where you're looking at maybe how people transcend physical objects. It's not really a design principle, but it's something that you might want to experiment with. Then we want to get these concepts down. We want to be precise, and both in design and then also when we talk about these things. So we want to have these terms like foveated rendering. That's a topic that's important to understand, but you don't really gain a lot of clarity from reading some of the literature because it's changing so much. I'm not sure how we should approach this in terms of practice, but this is stuff that we're going to probably do in these meetings is kind of go through some of these things, and I'm also planning on going through some of these things in the Saturday meeting. So some of these topics we'll be visiting and revisiting. Techniques, these are things on Blender, and then presence, which is a topic where it's they call being there. So, if you're meeting with someone in a Jitsi room like this, I can see your video, I can hear your voice, but you don't have very high presence. If I were in a place like vSpatial where I can see your 3D avatar and you're moving around in a space, I have more presence. I feel that you're there more. I can see more of you and that sort of thing. So that's another topic that's of interest. So, that's the way I approach the roadmap at this point. Is very much based on, I think the Discord server is probably a good sort of way to get at that roadmap, that vision. We're constantly working on it, but I think for this summer, we need to think about, having this sort of interface for research. Can we build things that we can do experiments with or, explore some of these concepts with? Meeting spaces for our lab activities. Can we create a meeting space where we can do cool things? We can interact. We can use things as props or present things in new ways, and then attached it as an education initiative. And then this Discord is the education initiative, in part because we want to make sure that people are clear on some of these concepts, some of these ideas, how they're implemented. There's going to be, I think at some point, a need to have like a meta discussion about some of these things. Maybe that's where we also contribute, is in saying, this is this concept, this is how people have approached it. This maybe are the set of technical challenges we can do, and so forth. So I definitely think Vishali is on the right track in terms of how to think about some of these things, but I would keep going back to the Discord and maybe engaging with it more, contributing to it. If you find interesting things, put it in those categories, and we'll keep going. Any comments on that or questions? Okay, yeah, no problem. And let's see, yeah. All right, so if that's all, well, that's all we have for today. Thank you for meeting. See you tomorrow.
Yep. Take care, everyone. If you have any questions, feel free to say anything in Slack or reach out to us there. But talk to you next time.
All right. Talk to you later.